And I think a big thing is forgiveness. I think when we don't forgive, we harm ourselves. Sam, the charity that we've worked on, some of the cases of abuse are so, you cannot describe them because you cannot understand how they take place. It was sort of love at first sight and a whirlwind romance, and we decided that we wanted to try and spend the rest of our lives together.
Hello grown-ups, and welcome to this week's episode of A Beginner's Guide to Being a Grown-Up with me, Sam Cooper-Gray. This week we are interviewing Kerrin Marcon, the founder of the VIA Academy, who has a passion for transforming sports coaching and is a truly global citizen, having lived across 3 continents. She shares how she ended up living in Hong Kong after a bet with her dad when she was only in her teens, how she started a charity when she moved to Japan, and the impact of moving her family around on her ambitions and what she now does with her business. So please join me in welcoming Kerrin to the podcast. Kerrin, welcome. So what I'd like to start with today is just ask you to share a little bit about your younger years and your journey into adulthood.
Thank you, Sam. Lovely to be speaking to you today. And again, just thank you for the invitation. Love the name of the podcast, love the questions, and looking forward to having a good chat with you today. And I thought that was a great way to start, because I think part of you never quite feels like an adult. You know, you're still working things out and navigating new scenarios. And so there's a part of you that feels I haven't ever grown up. And then there's the other part that feels so much more settled and more at peace. But my journey, certainly from reaching adulthood at around 18, started in South Africa. I was born and bred in South Africa, and at 18 I was doing a degree in law at the University of Cape Town. And when I graduated from that, I went on a family holiday to Hong Kong. And that turned into taking a gap year in Hong Kong and a bit of a bet with my father as to whether I could get a job in 4 days, which I did. It was not the greatest job, but it certainly afforded me the ability to stay and have a gap year in Hong Kong. And that first year then turned into a second year. And at the end of the second year, I met my now husband of nearly 30 years. And it was sort of love at first sight and a whirlwind romance. And we decided that we wanted to try and spend the rest of our lives together. And so at the end of the second year, instead of going back home, I stayed in Asia, and we were both transferred from Hong Kong to Bangkok. And we spent 3 years working in Bangkok when it was a tiger economy, which was incredibly exciting, quite nerve-wracking, but what an adventure. And then we were transferred to London for 7 years, and then Tokyo for 7 years, and then back to Hong Kong for 12 years, and now back in the UK. So along the way, had 3 children, which were, all of them were brought up mainly in Asia, and managed to work in most of the places where I lived, except for Japan, where I couldn't get a work permit. And so just prior to moving to Japan, we'd started a family charity. So for the years that I was there, I was able to bring up our children and work on this charity, and also support my husband with his business. So that's a little bit of where I've been. In terms of work, I worked in Hong Kong in direct investments. I worked for a mainland Chinese firm, which was very unusual in the late 1990s. Most of my friends were working for Hong Kong or foreign companies, so that was an incredible experience. And then when we moved to Thailand, I worked as an analyst in the telecom sector. And when we moved to London, I just felt I wanted very much to be in an industry which helped people. And so I then requalified and went into the wellness industry, set up a business, and ran that for 7 years. But then in Japan, I couldn't work. When we moved back to Hong Kong, I slowly started getting back into work and started working more in the sports field, but more from a media and entertainment side. COVID hit, and then that was the start of our current business. And so now we're based in the UK. and as you know, have a technology startup which we're trying to get to succeed.
And I'm sure we'll come back to talking about the challenges and the joys and the highs and the lows of setting up a business and making it grow. Taking you back to family holiday, you went to Hong Kong, no intention of living in Hong Kong. What was it about Hong Kong that made you go, do you know what, I'm staying? And then I really want to hear why your dad and you had a bet. But what was it about Hong Kong that made you kind of change that trajectory of your life?
Well, I grew up in a very small town in South Africa, but I competed a lot in show jumping. So we were always going back down to the cities. And actually growing up, my father had been a member of parliament. And in those days in South Africa, your constituency was in one place, but then you spent 6 months of the year in Cape Town. And I think I always just wanted to be in a much bigger city and really try and get out into the world. And now when I look back, I just realize what a privilege it was growing up like we did. It was such a gift, but I always wanted more. And I'd finished my first degree, and my uncle was a judge then. He sort of said, if you're going to spend your life in this career, why don't you think about having a year off? And it made a lot of sense. I was a bit unsure, to be candid, about carrying on in that trajectory. And I'd always just loved reading about business and just, learning about entrepreneurial stories, and it had always fascinated me. But the reason I'd studied law is I just hated apartheid. I hated injustice. I grew up as a middle-class white South African, and it just killed me that by birth I had privilege and opportunity. And I would look outside and people just by birth didn't. And so I wanted very much to try and go and do something about that. And that's why I had gone and studied law. But really, my heart was very much pulled towards business. And when we grew up, my father always taught us that the way that you really help a person is to give them a job. If you just give them a handout, it's so temporary and it does nothing for them as a family. But if you give a man a job, you can lift a village. And I think what I started realizing is that actually you could do so much more good, or for me, I could do so much more good, and I could try and sort of address some of the imbalances literally through commerce, by giving people work, which then gave them agency, gave them the ability to be educated, to be able to know how to deal with unjust situations in their whole life or in their own life. So that was the background to it. And because my uncle was in law, he sort of said, look, if this is the path you're going to go, take a year off and then go back to it. But because I'd had this interest, I thought, well, this would be an opportunity to sort of, give it a bit of a trial run. But also, Hong Kong in those days was so exciting. It was just amazing. It just didn't matter who you were or where you came from. If you had some ability and the desire to work hard, you were given an opportunity. And there was just, the sky was the limit. You could just about do anything or go anywhere. And it was infectious and very attractive. And so I had done my first degree in law, and I had to go back and do my LLB, and that's why my father was like, I really don't want you to not do this second degree, but take a year off and come back, and only if you're able to get a job before we fly out in 4 days. And so that was the bet. That was the condition, to be able to take a year off. And certainly then, Sam, gap years were not as common for us as South Africans. It was not really something that we considered. So, but of course, my family who were living in Hong Kong, it was very common for people to do it. And so it was a wonderful opportunity. And funny enough, I applied for the graduate trainee program at HSBC, but I just missed the dates. And so it was like, okay, well, let's go and do something else. So that's how I landed up in Hong Kong. And, it was just amazing.
So you went to Hong Kong, you got involved in loads of business, obviously met your husband, and then went all around the world. And I'm sure there's loads of stories and things you could tell us about the differences of working in different places in the world. you then landed back in the UK, having worked on the kind of media side of sport in Hong Kong. Tell me how you then progressed to, obviously you'd run your own business before, but what gave you the inspiration for the business you run now, and kind of how your previous experience would kind of help you to make that the success it is?
I'd love to say that it's a success, but we're not quite there yet, Sam.
Work in progress.
Exactly, yes, exactly. So again, had done lots of sport growing up. My husband had done lots of sport growing up, and then our three children turned out to be quite good sports people. And so when we were in Asia, they were being given opportunities that were incredible. And my daughter was being trained in Europe. You know, the Hong Kong government supported her. She would come out and train with some of the top people in Europe and then go back and compete in Asia. Our sons were being given opportunities to play sport at a very high level as well. And, you know, we were just amazed at the opportunities they were given. And we noticed the difference in their training compared to what you got when you were outside of the sort of elite system. We also noticed that there were only very few athletes that were actually given access to this knowledge and expertise, and that there were a much larger group of people that desired to have access, but through opportunity, through all sorts of reasons, were not being given the same access. So we had a lot of parents saying to us, you know, what did you do? How did you do it? How can I try and create these opportunities for my children? And so that was sort of going on in the background. And the reason I'd sort of got into sports media / entertainment is I'd been offered a job by someone in Hong Kong who said, I'd love you to come and work with me. I'm in the entertainment industry. And I said, well, look, I don't really know anything about that industry. And she said, well, that's really why I want you to come in, because you come in with a very different mindset. And so while I was working for her, I was exposed to sports media and what was going on really in the world of sport. She sadly passed from cancer, and so many people around said, could you carry on her work? But I just didn't feel I was well qualified to do that. The only area I understood a little bit about was sport. So this was happening sort of in the background. I was learning as much as I could, and then our kids were doing well. We had people asking us, you know, how do you do this? And realizing that, again, there was a huge disconnect between opportunity and talent, that there's so many people who are talented that is equally distributed, but opportunity isn't. And so this desire again to try and address an injustice or an unfairness, I could just feel welling up inside of me. And then COVID hit. And during that time, our youngest son was playing for a professional football academy and was being sent his programs via email. And our daughter downloaded an app, a fitness app, and I just noticed the efficacy. It was just an entirely different experience for her than for him with a paper program. And so we said, well, why don't we think about trying to find a football training app for him? And at that stage, we could not find one. And so we thought, well, why don't we think about trying one? And then that idea progressed to, why would you just do a training app? Why wouldn't you try and create an immersive experience into a professional academy for all of those people who are never going to be able to get into it? And why would you stick to one sport? Why wouldn't you try and do it across all sports? So that was what fed into this. It was like, you know, giving to many what's only given to few, and using technology to digitize this intellectual property and make it available to a much larger audience. And so really that's what fed into it. And again, having seen the demand in Asia and having seen the differing levels of expertise, you know, and having learned a little bit about entertainment and media, and then being exposed to a lot of technology, that all sort of converged into this current business.
I think that's fascinating, and it feels like it goes back to what you were saying about what your dad taught you as a child about, you know, equality of opportunity, and you know the kind of impact of privilege. Something you said really struck me, which was, you know, talent is equally distributed, but opportunity is not. So it feels like it really connected with you on a personal basis of something that's clearly been within you from a very early age. If I go back to that 18-year-old you, that younger you, she sounds quite tenacious, I'll be honest. Get a job in 4 days. Okay, I'm off. You know, and you've talked a little bit about, your upbringing and the positive experience of your upbringing. If your 18-year-old self could see you today, what would she kind of recognise in you, and what would she be absolutely blown away by?
I think probably what you would say, recognize, I think, is ambition, and recognize just being, as my children say, a bit of a badass and going, I don't care how hard it is, we're going to try. Even if every odd is stacked against us, let's give it a go. So I think probably that's just always been inside. And I think she wouldn't be surprised that I was in business and that I had an sort of an international experience, and also just a really happy family and prioritizing, family and trying to keep a good perspective. I think probably what she'd be surprised at is how much I love kids. I just I didn't think that was me, but I just love them. Every phase of them, they're just so fascinating. They're just so individual. They're just so wonderful. And I think as parents or as adults, just to come alongside them and just walk with them on their path, whatever phase they're in. I love them. And I think that would be very surprising, because it certainly was not what I thought I would. I think she'd be surprised at how little I care about things now, and how much more I want other people to succeed, and probably how incredibly unfit I am right now. I would battle to run a mile at the moment, but I think those sorts of things. But there's just been this common theme, this deep desire to help, and just finding ways to do that. And people have often said, why sport? And I just think sport has the ability to cross so many boundaries. It's a great leveler. Sam, the charity that we've worked on, some of the cases of abuse are so, you cannot describe them because you cannot understand how they take place. But one of the most successful therapies has been sport therapy, because it gives children structure, it gives them hope, it makes them feel physically strong, it gives them a discipline. And, when things are working well in sport, because obviously it also has money and politics and everything else attached to it, but when it's working well in its purest form, it does give people who come from nothing or nowhere the opportunity to progress, and it crosses great divides. And we see ourselves in the sports people we support, and we live the highs and the lows, and we see the battles, and we resonate with the battles, and it happens in front of us. And so I think it's also this wonderful human connection, because it just resonates with our journey, all of our individual journey, whether or not we're a sportsman or not. We see it playing out in front of us. And it gives us hope, and it also gives us great encouragement to push through struggles of our own, whatever they may be.
I think, and just that theme of you wanting to help people is so clear. And you touched on the word struggle, and that's one thing I wanted to ask you about is, what's the biggest struggle you've had to kind of push through in life? What's that biggest struggle or challenge? Yeah, battle.
I think it's so hard, isn't it, to choose to one when you're in your 50s, because there have been a number, but I did think about this when you sent the questions through, and I would say probably the strongest battle that we have had is that we almost lost everything. Well, we did lose everything as a family, financially, and that was so hard, because you experience emotions that you don't imagine. You experience shame, you experience a sense of failure, there's so much negativity attached to it, but at the same time, there are some lessons that you can only learn in the fire. So I've always said things, but after going through that experience, I became them. And I think you can only be transformed when you go through a battle like that. Like, you can pay lip service to it, but until you live it, you don't actually change. And now, after that, it's made me really clear about what is important and who is important. Because suddenly, when you lose everything, you see much more clearly, who is around you, who stays and walks that road with you, but also, where have you placed your hope? What do you rely on? Where do you get your confidence and strength from? Where do you get your identity from? And I've always said my whole life, it's not all of that. But until I lost it, I couldn't actually live it. And so I think that was the single event that changed me most. And I'm so grateful for it now. You never are when you're in it. And you rally against it, because so often you feel if you do the right things and you act the right way, you're going to experience the right outcome. There's that saying, good things happen to good people. Not always. Not always. Oftentimes, a whistleblower or a really good person, they're the ones that actually have the strongest outcome, and it can be negative. So I don't think that is a natural, we can rely on that. You do the good thing, you're the right person, the good thing will happen to you. I don't know. I think in the long run, yes. But we have to decide, who are we? And what are we going to stand on? And how are we going to act? And what decisions are we going to make, no matter what is done to us or what the outcome is? That confidence then comes from, this is who I am, and this is how I am going to roll. And I can't control the outcomes, but if I change that, I'm never going to be able to live with myself. So I think that's probably the struggle that changed me the most.
Yeah, and understandably, and I think, again, what you were saying around kind of who sticks around and who doesn't, I think in any trauma, no matter what it is, it becomes very clear the people who've really truly got your back, rather than the hangers-on. And I think that's an education in itself, and
Yes.
forms part of who we become. So across your life, you've obviously made some big decisions, the number of, the moving countries, going to a country where you couldn't work and then starting a charity. What's the best decision you've ever made?
I think to marry my husband and to stop work and bring up my 3 children. And in all of this, with my mind set on a career, it was not natural to prioritize relationships. But I am now so grateful that I was, in a way, forced to become a full-time mother, because it was a privilege, and I'm ashamed to even say that now, because it is genuinely a privilege to be able to have one of in a marriage, bring up children, because usually we both have to work. But I was just in this incredible position to be able to pour into our 3 children. And we've always believed that you have that ability until they're about 12, where you can invest in their character, and really help them, support them, shape them. And then after that, they start forming their own minds. And so, your job's almost done then. Of course, you never stop being a parent. But I had those precious years, and I'm so grateful. And I believe that if you do those, you don't get those years back in their life. But if you do them well, they benefit for the rest of their lives, and you benefit for the rest of your lives, our lives, because things are as healthy as they could be. And then just prioritizing our marriage, which I think as a mother, sometimes when you have kids, is harder to do. But also when you're very career driven, it's very easy to focus so much on that and forget that you need to spend time with your husband and prioritize him and prioritize the relationships, because I easily justify not doing that. But again, during hard times, during good times, that is your most significant relationship. And we always say to our children, it's the most important decision you ever make, is the person you're going to choose to spend the rest of your life with, because they influence every aspect of your life. And, choose well, the best you can, because it's long, marriage is long, and at times it's tough. So, but it impacts every part of you, your mental, your physical, your emotional, your relational, your financial situation. So don't just rush into it. So I think those are the best decisions I made. And I see now everything, I see the fruit of our labor, for want of a better word, with our children now. They are, you always love your children. We love our children, but I really like mine. I really like them. I just love being with them. They're fantastic people. They're amazing, wonderful, wonderful people, and just so exceedingly proud of them. And there's something I just wanted to say about the previous point that you said about learning who has your back. I think one thing I also realized is I probably was not there for other people who went through hard times. Until I went through my own, I realized I hadn't shown up enough in other people's lives. And so often, I think until you've walked in someone's shoes, you don't understand what they're going through. And so sometimes people don't stick around because I think they don't actually understand how serious or bad it is. They just don't have that knowledge. Or other times, they just haven't actually gone through hard times and they don't realize what it takes. So apart from learning who was in my life, I also learned, wow, try and do a better job next time someone comes into your path that's going through this, because it was also a learning curve for me that I hadn't actually shown up for other people in the way that I wished they would for me when I was going through a hard time.
Wow, and that's such an amazing reflection, isn't it? And I think sometimes people just don't know what to say, do they? And
Yes.
rather than say the wrong thing,
Yes.
they say nothing. And
Yes.
actually, if you're going through hard times, just people turning up, whether or not they say the right thing or not, is quite powerful. And to have that reflection that maybe you didn't do that before you went through that and really kind of understood what people need in hard times, I think it's a really, it's a very self-aware thing to do. Talking about being self-aware, and we all get given advice.
Yes.
And I'd love to hear where you've been given really good advice, but you've completely ignored it.
I seem to be referencing my father a lot, but obviously he played a large role, as did my mother, but a very different one. He had 3 daughters, and he basically said to us, the sky's the limit, and he just kind of like brought us up. He trained us as horse riders, and he just made us very tough. And he's like, I couldn't care if you girls, I couldn't care if you're growing up in a small town, in a small country, the sky's the limit. If you set your heart on it and you work hard enough, there's a high chance you're going to achieve it. So he did have a huge impact in forming certainly myself. And Sam, you and I've talked about this, and I don't want this to be about a male/female thing, because I have sons and I am where I am because of the most incredible men in my life, starting with my father, then my husband, but some of our shareholders, some of my advisors, some of our partners, the most incredible men. But as a woman, I've always felt less. I've always felt that I maybe wasn't as good. And so when I put a deck together or when I speak to someone, I make sure we've actually achieved it before we open our mouth about it. And kind of like, just go to the nth degree in terms of research and everything else. And so my father said to me, whatever you do, come back and do that 2nd degree. It doesn't matter if you don't ever use it, just come back and do that 2nd degree. And I didn't. And I wish in a way I had, because it would have given me the confidence that I lacked in the first few years of my career. In my heart, I felt I was good enough and I was smart enough, but I didn't feel like I had the qualifications to walk into a room and boss it, as my daughter says, and I don't know if I'm articulating this well enough or how to link it, but I retrospectively feel if I just spent 2 more years doing that, I would have shortened the distance of getting to the point that I am now, and really just feeling an incredible depth of confidence. So I think that's how I'd like to answer it. I'm not sure that's the right answer, but just on reflection, I wish I had more confidence earlier on, not arrogance, but just confidence and belief in my abilities. And maybe if I'd had that 2nd piece of paper, I would have had those, but then it would have been a different a different path. So,
Yeah.
but that was a piece of advice that stood out in my mind, and it still does.
And it's hard to know, isn't it? Because you don't know what trajectory your life would have taken had you done that. So we've talked a lot about kind of the things you've learned during your journey, kind of how you've got to where you've got to, some of the challenges and the struggles that you've overcome. I like to ask all of our guests to give our listeners a personal challenge, something for them to take away, to give a go to. And I love this bit because everyone gives completely different challenges, so it's super good fun. So what, if you were going to set a personal challenge to our listeners, what would it be?
To switch off their phones for 1 hour a day.
Okay.
And take time to be quiet and to think. I think that there is so much noise. It is so difficult for this next generation, and even for us, to think clearly and to think straight and to work out, what should I be doing with my life? What is my purpose? What are my priorities? We're just so inundated with noise. And I think that there's such an increased awareness now of how what we put into our physical bodies affects our health, whether it's our mental health or our physical health or everything else. Everybody's, much more aware now of that. And so my challenge is to become equally aware of what we put into our minds, because it has a larger effect than the food that we eat. What we put into our minds establishes, what we think, what we feel, what we do. And when we're just bombarded with so much noise, we can't discern what is good and what is important to be filling our minds with. And I think you have to actually switch off the noise on a daily basis to be able to make those informed decisions, to be able to respond to life rather than just to react to life. Because it's so hard when 24/7 you're being bombarded with some facts and a lot of things that aren't so truthful, they're opinions. And you're kind of like, oh, who am I? Where am I? What's my foundation? What should I be doing? So that would be my challenge. Turn it off for an hour, be quiet, think clearly, and be very aware of what you're reading and watching. It's the same as the junk food that we know is not good for us. We can listen to and watch junk, and that goes into our minds and into our hearts and into our souls, and that affects us. So that's my challenge. You can imagine why my children love me.
I think it's so powerful. And you know what? I think I'm actually going to take that personal challenge myself. I'm terribly addicted to my phone. So I'm going to give that a go, because I think it is so true. And I'd never really thought about it in those terms of kind of, you put junk in for your body, for your nutrients, and you understand the impact of that. But you're absolutely right. You put junk in terms of information, it's also going to have a negative impact, right? And it's hard to be the person you're meant to be if you've got all that junk floating around and not taking that time out. So I love that as a personal challenge, and hopefully some of our listeners will take you up on that as well. I'll be listener number one, taking you up on it. So we've come to our last question.
Yes.
And this is about what you would put into the guide. So if we turn to the guide into a book, what would you put in? So what is the one piece of advice that you would share with the listeners and put into a beginner's guide to being a grown-up?
Yeah, and I mean, you've asked me, so it has to be personal. You sort of think about what your answer would be, and you think, what's politically correct? And I thought, no, that's not what Sam's asking. She's asking, what would you do? And it could be unpopular to say this, but for me, I would say to take care of your soul, and to develop a strong faith, to find something to hold on to as an anchor and a foundation, something that when your life changes and so much goes around and so much is uncertain, there is some certainty in you. I have a strong Christian faith, and it has carried me through everything. And it's given me hope when I don't have hope. It's given me strength when I don't have strength. It's helped me to understand how much I need to change, not just looking out at others and pointing fingers and saying you need to do this, but realizing there's a lot I need to change as well. And I think a big thing is forgiveness. I think when we don't forgive, we harm ourselves. And so for me, that's another, just huge topic, that when you're able to forgive people who've harmed you and hurt you, you are the one that experiences the freedom. I think it was Mandela that said, when we don't forgive people, it's like taking a poison pill every day and hoping they will die. So I think that's another thing that has a huge effect on your mental and physical health, is just anger, hurt, everything inside of you. And so I think that has a much larger effect on us than we are currently recognizing. We're recognizing all of the physical wellness, but that soul wellness, that spiritual wellness is so important for so many different reasons. And so that's what I would put into the book. Give time to developing that side of your life as well. We're not just physical, we're not just relational. We also have a spiritual life, and to spend time developing that. And it's definitely had an incredible effect in my life, and I would not be here without it.
I think that's very powerful, because as you say, it's, for you it's your Christian faith, but for someone else that spiritualism doesn't need to be connected to a faith, but it's having something outside of you that kind of gives you support, virtual spiritual support, because then you've got something to rely on, whether that comes from an inner you or whether that comes from something external, is feeling like someone's got your back and that things will be okay, isn't it? And that's the feeding of your soul and the spiritual side of you, is seeing that you are a small part of a bigger cog, irrelevant of what that faith is.
And I think it gives you security and strength. And I mean, Sam, we're facing such uncertain times now. Where do you get your security from? Where do you get your strength from? From everything around you is just, if we read what could happen with AGI, not just narrow AI, if you just run scenarios, it's scary. There's so much instability around us, and it's like, you've got to just find something that centers you, quietens you, gives you strength, gives you direction, gives you purpose, because there is so much going on around that's just so unsettling.
Yeah, and I think that advice and the advice you've given and the challenges that you've shared are really connected, and it clearly is connected into who you are and your kind of desire to help people in whatever you do, whether it's with the sports app, whether it's with the charity, or whether or not it's raising your children. That kind of dedication through your life is really clear. Kerrin, thank you so much for being interviewed today. I've really enjoyed going on this journey with you. And although we know each other, I've learnt new things about you and about the highs and lows of your life, and makes me even more safe in the knowledge that you will continue to be successful as you continue in life. So thank you so much for sharing your story with us and sharing your tidbits of information and advice with the listeners.
Thank you, Sam. Thank you for having me on, and thank you for being a wonderful friend. You have done so much for so many of us who are trying to build businesses, and you've just understood the battles and pulled alongside us and supported us. So, thank you, and wishing you all the very best for the next chapter in your life, and really hope to pull alongside you as you go on a whole new journey and give you back some of what you've given to all of us. So thank you.
Awesome. Thank you for listening to this week's episode of The Beginner's Guide to Being a Grown-Up, and I hope you enjoyed it. Please do like, follow and subscribe wherever you watch or listen to us, because it really does help. Next week's episode is such an exciting one. We have the fabulous Jacqueline Frost joining us, who is the founder of Elevate Talent. And one of the things we talk about next week is the big debate about when we become grown-ups. So please do join us for that one when it's released next week. In the meantime, enjoy being a grown-up.